Rishi Sunak's flagship smoking bill was passed in the Commons last night, despite a Tory revolt that saw nearly 60 MPs vote against it. Many of those rebels were right-wing contenders for the Tory crown, who will be jostling for position to become leader. So what does this vote tell us about where the Conservative Party stands on civil liberties? And has the scale of Tory revolt weakened Rishi Sunak further? So joining us with his thoughts, his head of campaigns for popular conservatism, Andrew Allison. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning to you.
Thank you for being here with us this morning. So this is interesting, quite an interesting revolt taking place or splashed all over the newspapers. Is this really the sort of policy that a Conservative government should be passing, Andrew?
Well, the short answer to that question is no, it shouldn't be. But Rishi Sunak seems to have made this his flagship policy. He mentioned this quite a bit in his leader speech at last year's Conservative Party conference, and I knew there would be trouble then when he announced it. And as you say, almost 60 Conservative MPs rebelled last night. Over 100 Conservative MPs didn't bother voting. Now, of course, some of them might be away, they might be abroad on business, but the vast majority of them just decided that they weren't going to vote at all. And that included Penny Mordaunt, the leader of the House of Commons. So he's in trouble in the sense that he's getting his flagship policy through on the back of opposition votes.
It is interesting, isn't it? Were you surprised at some of the figures that voted against, such as Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick? I mean, what does this tell us about Sunak's position?
Well, I was surprised by one or two people who I didn't think would vote against it, but the people who did vote against it, I wasn't surprised about. I thought that Kemi would vote against it, and I thought that Robert Jenrick and others would vote against it. But I mean, it's hardly surprising because this isn't just this graduated smoking ban; it's also a ban on disposable vaping, and I gave up cigarette smoking through vaping. And I've run a campaign in the past promoting vaping. So that's annoyed me about this. And I think they're also trying to restrict the flavors that are in e-liquid as well. So it's all the headlines are about this graduated smoking ban, which will mean, in 20 years' time, someone who's 35 will be able to smoke and someone who's 34 will not be able to smoke. It's as ridiculous as that, but there's also a lot more to it as well. And I think it's a very unworkable legislation. I mean, the black market is going to cigarettes, the use of them is going to rise. It's just an unworkable bill, I'm afraid, and I think it'll crash and burn eventually.
Well, of course, Liz Truss, former PM, she is a leading opponent of this. She described it as a virtue-signalling piece of legislation. She urged Tories to reject it. She said that there were enough finger-wagging, nannying control freaks on Labour's benches. I mean, this is really what we're talking about here. This is, again, about another attack on our freedoms. Whether people like smoking or not, it is something that people should be at liberty to do if they wish, right?
Correct, and that's the thing. You can't treat adults as if they were children, and especially as this legislation goes further on. I mean, people are living longer these days. I mean, perhaps you will get a 100-year-old being able to smoke a cigar, but his 99-year-old friend will not be able to because it'll be breaking the law. I mean, that's about as ridiculous as this legislation gets.
I wanted to ask you something which is not about the smoking ban at all, but it is current news, and it's just come up really. And that was, I wonder if I could get your thoughts on the fact that a Belgian mayor yesterday tried to shut down a national Conservative meeting where Nigel Farage, Suella Braverman were in attendance. What do you think about that?
Well, the mayor of Brussels seems to think he's got a lot of control. Now, it just so happens that I bumped into a GB News presenter at Westminster Tube Station last night, and he mentioned to me that a Belgian MEP had been interviewed by him, and apparently the mayor of Brussels has form on this. He's very good at banning things and getting the police to be involved, but generally it's under the radar. Most people don't know about this. Well, I'm pleased now that everybody knows about this. And even the Belgian Prime Minister has come out and said that this is probably unconstitutional. So it's completely wrong. I mean, it's what they did in the communist times, isn't it? It's what they did in fascist days in Europe. So obviously, it's completely wrong. It's completely anti-libertarian. It's anti-freedom. But in some ways, I'm rather pleased that this has happened because it's brought these policies out in the open.
I mean, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Is that what happens is this whole Streisand effect oftentimes, and that is the more they try to silence people or ban what somebody stands for, the more they amplify the message. And that it's very interesting because both the smoking ban and what took place yesterday, it is an attack on our freedoms, isn't it? You don't have to agree with Farage or Suella Braverman to know that they still have a right to say to their freedom of speech, right?
Correct. You may agree with the smoking ban, but at the same time, there'll be something that you enjoy, and they'll try to ban that at some point. And unless you stand with us now against these anti-libertarian measures, then there's going to be no one left to defend you.
I think that's the thing, Andrew, is people always assume it's not going to impact me. Oh, I hate smoking. It's nasty. It's filthy. Like you, I also used to have a smoking habit and it's awful. It's so hard to give up. People have no idea unless they've smoked how difficult it is and how strong the pull. But it is so easy, isn't it, from people from afar to say, oh, that doesn't impact me. I hate filthy smoking. But sooner or later, it's going to roll round to them, isn't it?
Well, these people need to be honest. If they want to ban smoking full stop, then tell us that that's exactly what you want to do. Otherwise, you've just got to let adults be adults and let them make their decisions. And of course, we all make poor decisions. God knows how many poor decisions I've made over the years. I'm sure you have as well. We all do it, but that's part of freedom. And hopefully we learn from our poor decisions.
One final thing, Andrew. Has this all weakened Rishi Sunak? And if so, who do you reckon will be the next leader?
Oh, I can't possibly say. I was discussing this with a number of Conservative MPs last night. Yeah, no one can really decide on who the leader is. The leader of the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister is Rishi Sunak. Has this weakened him? He probably has a little bit, but we've got the local and mayoral elections and police and crime commissioner elections coming up on the 2nd of May, which is just 2 weeks tomorrow. If anything's going to weaken him, I guess it's going to be that. But I would still put a bet on Rishi Sunak leading the Conservative Party into the next general election.
Oh, I'm going to hold you to that, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on today's News Talk. Everybody, it's Andrew Allison, Head of Campaigns for Popular Conservatism, and we'll be right back.
Here's a little news flash. TNT